A questo punto inizia la trasmissione. Tutti i partecipanti sono in grado solo di ascoltare.
Good morning, everybody, and thank you for joining us in this special event where we are going to present the Connecting the Dots publication. And the subtitle is quite interesting, 10 years of renewable energy in MENA country, what has not happened. We have started last year with the first in Africa, and we found out, much to our regret and surprise, that in the whole continent of Africa, only 2% of the world renewable addition were engaged in Africa. And now we double check the effort to see what's happening in MENA, and you will see even here there are very small number compared to the potential. That's why we want to contribute to the fact checking and to the, let's say, understanding, and particularly at the end of the book, you will find 4 or 5 slides which gives the recommendation to make this to change. Of course, I want to thank the team of Rest for Africa and Enel Green Power who made this possible. And of course, the book will be downloadable from tomorrow from our website. I'm really glad to be back to Rest for Med, because Rest for Med started 10 years ago. Somebody remembers, it was 2012. We were born more or less as a, let me say, anti-desert tech approach, but then we gather a lot of consensus because we present the view of the potential investor to come in MENA and invest there. With no further delay, I am pleased to introduce you the President of Rest for Africa and Rest for Med, of course, and also the Chairman of Enel Green Power Global Generation for Enel, Salvatore Bernabei. Salvatore, over to you. Is Salvatore online? If he's not online, yes.
Okay, now I'm receiving the link for the web. Do you see me?
Yes, we see you and hear you. Go ahead, Salvatore.
Okay, so thank you very much, Roberto, and to everyone. I would like just to share with you some very short thought about the event that is called Connecting the Dots. So it's the second year in a row that we made this study, and we tend to give our contribution to the development of the renewables within Africa. In particular, this year we are speaking about the Middle East and North Africa. What I'm telling you now is something that you have probably heard, and from one point of view, it's quite frustrating to repeat the same things each year, but we have to do it because all the stakeholders that should take a decision should understand that it's really needed what we are asking to them. And what are we asking to them? First of all is that we have an ambitious, the world, not Enel, not Rest for Africa, but we have an ambitious to limit the increase of temperature by 1.5 degrees. This is needed for the war. And in particular also for Middle East and North Africa, who is a part of the world who is endowed with one of the highest radiation, with one of the best potential of resources. And this is another point that I used to repeat, whatever part of the world I'm referring to, because this is the good news of the renewables, that they are common, they distributed along the different countries. So investing in renewables is a real way to make the distribution fair, to do the distribution of energy fair, so real affordable, because every country has its own potential. There will not be the dependency that we have today from the energy standpoint, because each country is blessed with a higher potential in terms of resources. So a way to make the world more just is developing renewables and the grids, by the way, to connect all the renewables. But if we know that this country has blessed by this fortune, if we know that we have this big commitment at the level, worldwide level, then we go to the reality and we see that less than 1% of the global renewable capacity have been built in the Middle East and North Africa in the last decade. So why that? And when it comes to the research of the causes, it is another common point that I used to repeat each time that I speak about the development of renewables in this part of the world. We have the same issues. We have a regulatory framework that is not fitting with the needs of the investor. We have risks. We have some risks in these countries who are not properly assessed. So we need instruments, we need tools to de-risk the investment. And we also need to take the decision that is a bold decision that we want to go in this direction. Because although it's quite clear where we have to go, not all the countries took a real commitment to go in this direction. So we have evidence that is needed. We have evidence that it will contribute to make the development more just. We have evidence that there is potential. We have evidence that we are not doing what we should do, because just 1% of renewable have been developed on these countries, and then we need for the stakeholders and the decision taker to take now the right decisions. And to involve also more the younger generation, because the future will be of the generation of the future, the young generation. So our contribution as Rest for Africa Foundation through this connecting to the dots, that is real, connecting all the different elements that I'm introducing in this introductory speech, is to try to promote a dialogue among all the stakeholders, to give our contribution for the dialogue that should then take some relevant decision for the future of this part of the world. So in the study, as you will see in the presentation that will be done after my introductory speech, we are defining what are the causes for the investment not being so high in the past, but also what could be the solution So when identifying the causes, we want to give transparency to each one about what's happening and what are the root causes. This is extremely important if one wants to take the right decision, because first of all, you have to measure where you have, and you have to compare what you are doing in your country compared to the countries that are doing best respect to you. This is not something impossible to do. This is not like going to the Mars. I mean, it's quite easy, the recipe, but we have to give the evidence about objective manner what is the current situation. And then there is a proposal about what could be the solution. So we want just to give this contribution for making happen then a dialogue at different level. And this should be a starting point. So today's meeting wants to be for this part of the world a starting point about this, let's say, causes that we are putting on the table, the possible solution. And we really hope that starting from today, a different dialogue will be maintained, also taking into account the sense of urgency to act, because this is not a choice, the one that we are called to do. It's a need that we have to address. And I'm finishing my introduction, just also thanking all the team of Race for Africa, of Enel Green Power, and all the other colleagues that have worked in the last month to make this report and study available. So thank you very much to everyone, and I hope that you will enjoy this session. Thank you, Roberto.
Thank you so much, Salvatore, for your kind words. And I do underline that this is an additional insight that may help not only the colleague in the southern part of the Mediterranean, in MENA, but also our investor who would really like to come and make the difference there. I also want to underline not only we have our member like Enel Green Power, like Bonelli Erede, but we have three distinguished hosts. Salma Osman Hossein, the head of the Central Department for License and Tariff in Egyptera, the regulatory in Egypt. I know that we want to go back also as the private sector to invest in Egypt when it's possible. We also have Aliza Rouli, the Director of Cooperation and International Development of Mazen, the other pillar of the MED, Morocco, Egypt. And overall, we have the pleasure to introduce you also, Youad El Karatz, with the Director Executive at RECRI, the regional center for MENA and all MENA country based in Cairo. So I think we have three distinguished input. What I want to say, Salvatore, whatever will come from this webinar will also be used by us in preparing the workload for next year strategy. Thank you again, and let me introduce now Salma Osman Hossein, a friend of mine since many years, and she's back from Egyptera. Salma, a pleasure to have you here. I give you the floor, and thank you for accepting not only to moderate, but also to give your wrap-up at the end of the meeting. Thank you, Salma.
Thank you, Roberto. Thank you, Mr. Salvatore, for the great beginning of this webinar. I most welcome all of you. It's my pleasure to have you all here today for the webinar, Connecting the Dots, 10 Years of Renewable Energy and What Has Not Happened. And this is a difficult question. Most of the countries in the MENA regions had ambitious renewable energy targets clearly stated as their strategies and declared policies. Currently, they are mostly having a transition phase where they need to define future plans, as renewable energy is no longer the last luxurious option as it used to be due to the technology evolution, competitive pricing, the mix of financial instruments and the innovative policies clearly understood by all markets did all us here today. What happened is not an easy question to answer, but having a 10-year historical analysis will definitely give the answer in the right way. It was justified, the why it happened, and open our minds to the way forward. We will be discussing today what happened in the last 10 years and take a close look at Morocco in perspective, what limited the renewable energy growth, and what are the risks that still prevent the necessary investment. Our webinar today will be split into 2 sessions and followed by a wrapping up and closing remarks. The 2 sessions will be for 25 to 30 minutes. I encourage you all to post your questions on the chat window, since we have limited time, and I think we all need to hear and get a fruitful presentation from our distinguished speakers. So we will do that at the end of the webinar, answering most of your questions. I will give the floor now to Mr. Ali Zeroli, Director of Cooperation and International Development in Mazen, to show us the Morocco perspective. Mr. Ali, the floor is yours, please.
Do you see me?
Hi, Mr. Ali.
Yeah,
Yes.
Do you hear me? It's okay. Thank you, Selma. Thank you, Roberto. Thank you, Salvatore. It's a pleasure for me to take part to this very important and interesting webinar, Connecting the Dots. 10 years of renewable energy in MENA, what has happened and what has not happened. So I would like to say that I will give I will share what are the recent achievements in Morocco during the last decade, and also share with you the future prospects of Morocco in the field of renewable energy. And first, I would like, I believe that we all remember 2008, which was a very difficult year that was marked by an international crisis in the world. And it's a year in which the price of the barrel of oil had reached a peak of $148. So it was at that time a record in the history, and it's still a record in the history. And during this time, the world, if we remember well, the world became divided between 2 paths, that of fossil fuels and that of renewables, which at that time was the road that was the less chosen because it was much more expensive. So in 2009, His Majesty the King Mohammed VI demonstrated a very proactive and bold vision in turning this crisis into an opportunity, which later was translated into an ambition. So His Majesty set an ambitious strategy target aiming to expand renewable energies in the country with the explicit goal of reaching 42% by 2020. Since that time, Mazen was created in order to serve as the executive arm for the implementation of this strategy. And now Mazen, the Moroccan Agency for Sustainable Energy, is in charge of administrating and monitoring the country's renewable energy projects and strategy. Maybe one of the most famous achievements of Mazen and Morocco is the Norwazazet multi-technological solar complex, which is the largest one in the world with a capacity of 580 megawatt based either on CSP and solar PV technologies. And thanks to all this success, Morocco has set a new objective, which is 52% by 2030. And by saying 52%, so we move from 42% to 52%, we can say that it's just 10% of additional capacity, but basically it means that we need to move from 4 gigawatts that are operational today and based on renewable energy to an additional of six additional gigawatts that needs to be developed. But we need also to take into account that new requirements will emerge, such as the electric mobility, the industrial decarbonization, and the generation of green hydrogen and its derivatives. And all these new needs will even raise the global need of renewable energy capacity that will be installed in Morocco. So in addition to the minimum of 6 gigawatts that need to be additionally developed in Morocco by 2030, we will have additional need that will increase the level of renewable energy in Morocco. So it creates a new dynamic around green electrons and green molecules that will also, in my point of view, that will also allow an industrial ecosystem to set up in Morocco. And this ecosystem is requiring energy and renewable energy in the transformation process. We can mention, for example, the aluminium industry, the glass industry, the steel industry, the agro industry. So all these heavy industries that are needing a lot of renewable energy in their transformation process, in order also to avoid the tax cumber that will enter in force in Europe from 2023. So a new dynamic, industrial and economical dynamic could set up and could emerge around green energy and renewable energy. So beside the dynamics that we have initiated in Morocco around renewable energy, Morocco has developed also bilateral agreements with the north and with the south. We have developed an initiative that is called the Sustainable Electricity Trade Roadmap with Portugal, Spain, France, and Germany. And this initiative is permitting to put in place the legal framework to facilitate the implementation of the cross-border green corporate PPAs between these 5 countries. And this initiative now is being extended to green molecules, so which will improve the level of trade of green molecules and green electrons between Morocco and the 4 European countries. It will help all the countries to raise the level, the installed capacity in terms of renewable energy, and to facilitate the trade of green electrons and green molecules. When it comes to the South-South cooperation, several African and least developed countries are working to Morocco for its expertise and success in the battle against the climate change and energy transition, notably via the development of renewable energy. So, I would like to remind here that Morocco has always been a strong supporter of South-South cooperation and has a long history in terms of exchanging know-how. Mazen has been trying for years to establish ties and links with the African continent in the area of renewable energy. And we explored either the bilateral and the multilateral basis. So on the bilateral basis, we work with approximately 20 countries, mainly in Africa, around 4 main axes, which are the knowledge exchange, the capacity building, the technical assistance, and the co-development. And we can mention here, for example, that we have worked and we're working with Rwanda, and especially the REC, Rwanda Electrical Utility, to develop the largest Nyabarongo 2 hydraulic project. We are also working with ZESCO in Zambia to develop more than 450 megawatts of renewable energy. So Mazen bilateral dynamic with the African countries has generated also some trilateral forms of collaboration with prominent international development banks to benefit from Mazen experience in order to make a greater effect in Africa and to accelerate this process of developing renewable energy. And we can mention here that Mazen is chairing the steering committee of Desert to Power. That is an initiative sponsored by the African Development Bank. And we are happy to note that we are working with the rest for Africa around this initiative also in order to support the capacity reinforcement and the know-how exchange with the Sahel countries. So the objective of this initiative is to bring 10 gigawatts of solar energy to 11 Sahel countries by 2030, with a great impact towards 50 million people. And Mazen is also working in a strong partnership with the Islamic Bank, Development Bank, in order to accelerate and to accompany the development of renewable energy in the member countries of the ISDB. And we are very close to sign two agreements in order to begin the development of 3 solar projects with 2 African countries. Maybe the last initiative that I would like to mention here, and to show what kind of strong ties we have with the African countries, is the Coalition for Sustainable Energy Access, jointly led and created with Ethiopia, which is the first initiative in the history of the UN that has been designed by 2 southern countries, 4 southern countries. And the aim of this initiative, and the West Africa is also part of the work that we are doing around this initiative, is to facilitate and to accelerate the spirit of South-South cooperation and the spirit of know-how exchange between southern countries. So just to summarize, Morocco has taken a technology agnostic strategy to accelerate its energy transformation by diversifying its project portfolio and by establishing the routes to a more responsible and sustainable Earth. So thanks to His Majesty, the King is fully aims to respect its active commitment to the Paris Agreement, the UN SDGs, and our indices. And we hope to contribute, and as Mazen, to contribute to the acceleration of the dynamic of developing renewable energy here in Morocco, but also at the creation of an industrial ecosystem that needs renewable energy in the process of transformation to accelerate the global economical and industrial development in Morocco. And because we believe that there is no growth dynamic or development dynamic that could be limited to one country, and we believe that if Morocco wants to accelerate its development, it needs to be inscribed into a regional dynamic. We are working very closely with the neighbors and African countries, but also, as I said, European countries, to accelerate this regional dynamic around renewable energy for the benefit of our populations. Thank you for your listening, and I hope I have shared with you the achievements of Morocco during the last decade, but also our future perspectives.
Thank you, Mr. Ali. It was a great presentation, great information, really exciting in such quite challenging targets. You're giving a great overview of your regional cooperation and how you work south-south and north-to-south. And I think we're talking here collaboration and regionally. So thank you for your insightful inputs for Morocco. And now we are going to start what brought us here today, connecting the dots with Sylvia Piana, the head of Regulatory Affairs Africa, Asia, and Australia area. Sylvia, you're most welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Salma. Do you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Okay, good. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you to the previous speaker for their introduction. I'm also here today. I'll just take 5 minutes of your time to tell you something more about what is the Connecting the Dots series and why this year we're going to focus on Middle East and North Africa. We started the Connecting the Dots series last year. I was lucky enough to be involved since the very beginning. And last year, 10 years separated us from 2030. 2030 is a date I'm sure that everybody has in mind as the reference date for the SDGs objectives. But we are now at the end of 2021, less than 10 years left. There is plenty of studies on the way to go, so why did we want to engage in another one? Because most of the existing studies talk about the future, so how much do we need to accelerate, for instance. And with the Connecting the Dots series, we wanted to come up with something that would for sure fuel this discussion, but also put the challenge ahead of us in perspective with a fact-checked, very data-driven approach. In other words, let's try to understand how big the SDG challenge is by taking a close look at what has been done or not been done over the past 10 years. Let's understand if all the declarations, the pledges, the commitments made so far are just facade. So putting into perspective is the key concept behind the Connecting the Dots series, always with a very specific geographical or thematic scope. We received, I have to say, positive feedback on the work we carried out last year because it had to give some practical substance to ground what is a very political discussion and to bring out, to let emerge the countries that indeed got involved, that indeed have been able to attract investments. We talked about Africa as a continent last year. In doing so, we necessarily lost some important regional element because, you know, Africa is made up of more than 50 countries, often very different from each other. Therefore, we decided this year to turn the spotlight on a specific region. And this region is MENA, Middle East and North Africa. Why did we choose MENA? Well, for more than one reason, of course. To begin with, it has a largely common language and culture. Not only, this region also shares a number of economic and environmental similarities. For instance, today we'll see later on that some of the most extreme impacts of climate change are already be felt and will be even more felt in this region. The second reason is that it's a very strategic region, particularly in the relationship with Europe. Everything happening in MENA basically has a strong geopolitical implication for Europe, but not only, for the world, I would say. And a third point, another point, is that if we exclude South Africa, MENA is the region where there are the biggest investments today in renewables. And last but not least, MENA includes both countries with the largest oil and gas reserves worldwide. At the same time, it has countries completely devoid of internal fossil fuels. This is why we think that MENA could really become the symbol of energy transition. The theme of energy transition is in MENA as relevant as it is challenging. It's a true historical change. And so here, maybe more than everywhere else in the world, the transition totally penetrates into society, into policy, into the economy. We see this in a few minutes when we deep dive into the report. So all of the above and much more are the reasons why I'm really looking forward to what comes next in this webinar. So I hope you'll enjoy it and you'll find the Connecting the Dots series as interesting as I did.
Thank you, Sylvia. It was great hearing from you choosing the MENA region as a start, and I totally agree that it has a large contribution of the gas and fuel, and it will be the symbol for the energy transition. Now we're moving to what happened in the last 10 years with Daniel Guzu, Access to Energy Officer at Rest for Africa Foundation. Daniel, the floor is yours.
Good morning to all. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Thank you, Salma, for introducing me, and thanks to the previous speakers for their very interesting contributions on the study and their views. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Daniele Guzzo. As Salma anticipated, I work in the Access to Energy program in West for Africa, whose objective is to support knowledge building and the development of solutions on field to foster sustainable access to renewable energies on the African continent and the Middle East. I'm very glad, first of all, to be speaking among this panel of distinguished guests from all over the Mediterranean basin. With this slide, we see a brief overview of the topics we are going to tackle in the next hour or so. As Silvia highlighted a few seconds ago, this year's study aims at looking at what happened in the MENA region in the last decade with regard to renewable energies development. In the first chapter, which I'm going to present myself, we're going to see cross-cutting issues which are relatable to the vast majority, if not all, the countries involved in the study. In the second part, we're going to take a look at the specific aspects that prevented renewable energy growth, despite the enormous potential. While in the third and last part, we will have a brief wrap up and we will draw our conclusions. Next slide. So what we are doing is here, we are asking ourselves what has changed in the last decade in the region and how the general framework in which the study moves has been changing. Next slide. Next. So first of all, let's start from the basics, from the macroeconomics. There has been a structural change overall in the region when it comes to GDP distribution and wealth. If we compare the two macro areas of the region, North Africa and Middle East, it is possible to see that the total GDP has been more and more concentrating in a few countries, and in particular in high-income countries, detain more than 50% of the total GDP, despite representing only 12% of the total population. Next slide. Nevertheless, the last decade, as also said by other guests, has been not a quiet one for the region. We have faced globally, in a handful of years, a major global financial crisis. We have faced Arab Springs, wars, and we are still living on the consequences of a global pandemics. Obviously, it goes without saying that MENA region is no exception, and has had severe effects on many different fronts. Some countries have shown higher level of resilience, while the current estimation of output losses for the region is about 3.9% of output losses in 2020. Even considering rebounds effects in the next couple of years, it is estimated that the output levels will hardly go back immediately to the levels prior to the crisis. It is anyway difficult to make accurate estimations, as the recovery will highly depend on the rollout of vaccines and other measures of containment of the pandemic. Next slide. These macro trends, as we said, global financial crisis, the pandemics, have obviously a direct impact on people's lives. From a socioeconomic point of view, MENA represents one of the worst cases of youth unemployment worldwide, and it's been like this for many years now. And the situation has not been improving in the last years, when both total unemployment, youth unemployment, and gender gap have been widening. As you can see also from the graphics, the gap has been widening plus 20% in just the last few years. Also, the poverty, the total poverty rates have been increasing. For the first time after 30 years, we are witnessing a rise in extreme poverty rates. Indeed, the percentage of people below the extreme poverty lines has doubled in just 3 years, from 2015 and 2018, as obvious consequences of the geopolitical situation. Next slide, please. We can also take a look at the general framework of world governance indicators, which is another important piece of the equation. So how does the MENA region has been performing over the course of the last 10 years when it comes to the quality of governance? Despite there are several differences among countries, the general performance of the area is far behind OECD standards in all of the 6 world governance indicators provided by the World Bank. Moreover, these indicators have been worsening in the last decade due to the effects of global and regional dire events that we just mentioned. We can see also there are some small, let's say, exceptions. For example, United Arab Emirates have done quite well, and Tunisia as well in some of these indicators. But let's say this is not enough to take up the average of the region. Next slide, please. Now, after we had the general overview of the situation of the region, touching some macro topics here and there, we are obliged to talk about the elephant in the room. Climate change is not only our main source of concern for the years to come, but is already having tangible effects globally and specifically on the region, which is one of the most exposed worldwide. Next slide. We will just mention a few examples here. The region is home to some of the hottest places on Earth that are witnessing continuous rise in temperature, and continuing on this path might become inhabitable in around 80 years. Together with this, the region is also exposed to long dry periods, and in the last years, the dry periods have been one of the longest in recent centuries, basically. It goes without saying that climate change will also affect the livelihoods of people, and the more climate migrants will be. Next slide. So nowadays we are kind of used, and we're getting used to hear about climate change threats. But what are we referring to specifically when it comes to the MENA region? Well, in this slide, just to mention a few examples, we can see that, for example, the number of total natural hazards has been doubling since 1980 in the world, but in the MENA region, it has been tripling. While, for example, the fresh water per capita availability worldwide is around 7,500 cubic meters per person a year, in the MENA region is 10 times lower, so approximately 800. Next slide. So after we have seen this situation and the growing concern about climate change effects, what are we talking about today? Why we want to talk about renewable energies? Because we think that renewable energies can tackle, it's a way to tackle this complex system of interlinked issues. It's one of the answers we firmly believe in, and now we're going to ask ourselves why we believe in this answer. We have 3 main points that we want to touch, among others. Because renewable energies allow to establish a more resilient economy, because it helps in limiting the dependency on fossil fuels, and because it supports the creation of green job opportunities. We will tackle these topics in the next sections during today's webinar. Next slide, please. So we have been talking about the macroeconomics of the region and the social impact generated by the dire events that affected the region in the past years. We have also said that we believe in renewable energies to be one of the answers to unlock MENA's potential as a whole. But the question now is, where do we stand now in terms of renewable energies development in the region? Next slide. And the answer is within these few slides, because as of 2019, only 4% of the total power generation comes from renewables in the MENA region, largely dominated by hydro, and with leading role of very few countries as front runners in terms of renewable energies development. As we can see, for example, Morocco is one of them, and as also Mr. Zellouli was underlining at the beginning of the presentation. Next slide. But the slide before was a picture of the current renewable energies development. But what does the renewable energy scenario look like when we put it in perspective in the last 10 years? The answer is right here. MENA region has seen its share of world electricity demand growing by 27% in the last decade, but has not accompanied the same growth in renewable energy additional capacity. Indeed, only 1% of the global renewable energy capacity was added in MENA in the last decade, far from what is needed to satisfy a growing energy demand, and very far from what its potential could guarantee to the final users. Next slide, please. If we take a look at the specificities of the renewable energies development, there is an enormous difference among countries within the region. As an example, Iran is dominating the large hydro development, while Morocco is doing very well in solar wind at the capacity, together with other few countries such as Egypt, Jordan, Israel, and the United Arab Emirates. Next slide, please. But let's say if we look at the numbers of the region, in this map, we can clearly see it. The region has an extremely high potential to satisfy its energy demand, relying on renewables, which can support the expansion of power generation and help cutting emissions. MENA is endowed with an enormous amount of solar irradiation and wind, as Mr. Bernabé was highlighting at the beginning during the introduction. In this map, for example, data show that MENA could be able to satisfy, theoretically, its internal demand by 3 times if the PV potential was properly exploited. Next slide. So here's just a brief wrap up of what we've been talking in this first chapter and the main topics that we have treated in the study. We have seen that the MENA has undergone several socioeconomic challenges in the last years, and now has to face the consequences of those challenges, as well as new ones. Renewables have an extremely high potential to be one of the catalyzers of a unique opportunity for the region to step up as a leading agent of change. Thank you for your attention, and back to you, Salma.
Thank you, Daniel. It was really great to understand the socio-economical facts for the MENA region and the figures of the renewable energy in demand, and to see the main players that contributed. I think connecting the dots today is inviting the other countries to start looking at this and be part of the future for renewable energy. Is you clarified for being a real catalyzer to step up all the indicators for life, especially we're talking sustainable development goals and obtaining them nowadays. Thank you again, Daniel, and I think you made it easier for the next presenter, where we have to address what limited the renewable energy growth for the MENA region. And the floor is for you, Mate Letvin, the competitor intelligence market studies and strategic analyst specialist at Enel Green Power. The floor is yours, Mate.
Just sorry, I think that I will start the second chapter and Mathieu will follow right after me. So my name is Ibtissem Ami. I work in the regulatory team of Enel Green Power. And so Daniele went through what happened in the last 10 years in MENA. And in this second chapter, we will, together with Mathieu, we will present you the elements that, in our view, have limited the growth of renewable energy in the region over the past decade. So the first element, as you can see on the slide, that we will be talking about is the regulatory framework, obviously, and then we will go through the challenges of the power sector that have also impacted renewable energy. And my colleague Mathieu will tell you more about the high risk perception affecting private investment in the region, and also that the challenge of MENA to be an oil and gas region, and how they are dealing with the energy transition. So next slide, please. Next slide again, thank you very much. So in general, over the past 10 years, we can say that the regulatory framework has improved. And I would say that rather than improved, it has been built from scratch for most of the countries. So for a big majority of countries, 18 countries over the area, they have adopted renewable energy targets, sometimes very ambitious. And so at the first glance, it seems that there's a very high political commitment. But if you go deeper into the analysis, and you realize that only half of those countries have updated targets. And even less countries have targets that are part of a national strategy with a higher view and vision. And today we can say that most of the targets that has been set in MENA are unachieved because they are not used in the right way. They are used for communication purpose because most of those countries are very keen to show that they want to become green and greener. And today we can say that unfortunately, targets are not a driver for the growth of renewable energy in MENA. And if you look at the graph on the right, we can see that we have, as Roberto said during the introduction, we have three champions, we have three pillars. The first one is Jordan. They already reached the first set of targets for 2025. And then you have Morocco and Egypt. We can consider that they are very well on track to reach the 2030 targets. But the fact is that then you have all the others, which are very high, very behind. And I just would like to underline that there's a very important gap between the first three countries and all the others. So next slide, please. So the regulation, as we said, has improved, and most of those countries have adopted supporting schemes in a very different way because it is very much linked to the openness of the market. So we have taken samples of countries just to facilitate the discussion, and we can say as a conclusion that tenders are the most common tools today in MENA for the scaling up of renewables. While on the other hand, we can say that feed-in tariff programs are not used anymore, and we can also add that they haven't been so successful. As a route to market for IPPs, we have generally the possibility to have the PPA with national utilities in single buyers markets, such as the good example here is Tunisia. And in more open countries, you also have the possibilities to sign a direct PPA with commercial and industrial clients. And this is the case for Morocco and Egypt, which are the most open market today. So what I just want to underline here is that in an area where auctions are very frequently used, where it is the most common tools, we have seen a total absence of structured programs such as Get Fit or even scaling solar of the World Bank, while it has been used in other areas, including African countries. So next slide, please. Thank you. So we have seen that an improvement for the regulatory framework in MENA, but we can say that there's still a high risk perception from the investors, and it is mainly due to 4 issues. The first one, and the most important one, I would say, is the regulation. There's a very poor implementation of the laws. Most of the time in MENA, you have the main law in place, but then you have the secondary legislation that are making this law applicable, which are completely missing. The second point on regulation is that there's a very slow amendment process because it is very much linked to the political life of the country, unfortunately. The second point we want to talk about are tenders. So auctions are not managed in the right way. We have seen tenders with no standard documentation. We can say that generally the process is very, very slow. We have a lot of postponements, and also we have calculated that over the past 10 years, we had a cancellation of 10,000 megawatts of capacity, which is a lot. So according to PPAs, most of the time they are not bankable because important features are missing for international banks to finance it. And we have also important issues with currency convertibility. And a great issue today is the sovereign guarantees, because this is an important matter for IPPs, because you can understand that when an IPP enters into a 20 to 25 years agreement with a national company that is leading financial problems, obviously sovereign guarantee is a key matter to mitigate the risk of not being paid. From a business environment point of view, I don't want to be very much in the cliche, but we are in an area where everything is very slow. And I would say that the most important point is not the slowness, but it's the lack of transparency, which is somehow linked, because a lot of elements are not published by the regulators, such as the tariffs, for example, but you need to go and to negotiate it one by one with the different authorities. So you can lose a lot of time and anything is transparent. Next slide, please. Yes, so we wanted to come back quickly on Morocco, even if Mr. Zerwali said a lot about Morocco, but we wanted to say that, as we said before, Morocco is one of the pillars of the area. And I think that they can be considered as a very good benchmark. A lot has been done during the past 10 years. For Morocco, renewable energy has always been of vital importance. And they started in 2010, so more than 10 years ago, to liberalize the market. So the law 1309, which is the pillar law of the renewable energy in Morocco, has allowed IPP to sell electricity directly to industrial clients connected in high voltage. Currently, the most important point on Morocco is that they are amending this law and they want to further open the market and to liberalize also the medium voltage market. Excuse me. They are also working on the grid code because there was no grid code. It was, and this is why we had a lack of transparency on connecting projects into the national grid. So a grid code will be available at the end of the year. And Morocco is also amending the law on self-generation. So in my view, Morocco will need to face in the coming years two important challenges. The first one is that they need to accelerate the amendment of the laws, especially the 1309 law, because it is a process that started in 2019, and that is still not completed. So as we said before, those processes are very slow. And the second one, the regulator, which is ANRE, has been created in 2016. And they really need to become operational as soon as possible, because you will have a very kind of liberalized market. So the more the market is liberalized, the more you will need the intervention of a regulatory entity. So next slide, please. So now we will talk about the challenges of the power sectors that in MENA has somehow limited the renewable energy growth. Next slide, please. So if we have a look to the interconnection in the region, you can see on the graph in the right that for the infrastructures, we have a lot of planned infrastructures. It's an area where you have a lot of projects, but we have very few existing lines. And we can consider, and this is a pity, to have three bubbles, three areas. The first one is North Africa. They are connected one between the others, and they are also synchronized on the European market. The second one is the area that is going from Egypt to Turkey. And this third bubble, I would say, excuse me for the language, but it is the Arabic Peninsula. And if you go and see very well into the details, these regions are not very well connected between them. And as a consequence, the regional trade of electricity in the region is very limited. In 2019, it represented only 2% of the generated electricity. Just to give a comparison, in Europe, it's about 9%. So there's no real exchanges, there's no trading. It is obviously due to the lack of infrastructures, but also there's a very important lack of harmonization of trading rules and legislation between those countries. And it's a pity because in a more integrated system, in a more integrated power market, it could help MENA to support the world power system and integrate in a better way the renewable energy. So next slide, please. So another challenge of the power market are the power outages. They have a very negative impact on the private sector annual sales. The World Bank estimates that almost 5% of the private sector annual sales is lost due to power outages. This is a very impressive number. And obviously, we need to keep in mind that we are talking about a very vast area with important disparities. So if you go and look at the graph on the right, we will talk about average, but we have an average of 87 hours of outages per month. And while in OECD countries, the average is less than 1 hour. So this is a very important problem that needs to be addressed. Next slide, please. Okay, so the last point I would say is the underpricing of electricity. In this region, electricity is sold at a price which is inferior to the cost recovery tariff. And electricity prices today in all the region are heavily subsidized, even for industrial clients sometimes. And it is very much a political matter because politics are very reluctant to cut subsidies and to restructure the pricing because for them, in their mind, the fact to keep the prices very low is like a guarantee to keep the social peace. I think this is all from the slide. I just want to wrap up and to leave you with 2 or 3 messages. So the first one is that you need to have a solid, stable regulatory framework to foster investments in MENA. The second one is that you need to have master plans with clear and realistic targets, because targets will become like a driver of your strategy. They are very important. And the third one is that you really need to manage tenders in an efficient way. And also, I would say, as Mr. Zerwali was saying, that you need somehow to enhance and to encourage the South-South cooperation, because it will help you a lot in having an integrated market, integrated systems that are going to be very resilient when we will have the renewable energy production. So that's all from my side. Thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you, Ibtissam. And for the sake of time, I will leave the floor directly to Matteo Ledev, the Competitor Intelligence Market Studies and Strategic Analysis Specialist at Enel Green Power. The floor is yours, Matteo.
Thank you. Thank you, Ipsi, for the explanation of the first section. In fact, the risk perceived by the foreign stakeholders is one of the main obstacles for an investment in renewable energy. And if we can take an example, the next slide, please.
if we take it as an example, this study by Rest for Africa and PwC on 7 countries of southern and eastern Mediterranean area, Morocco emerged clearly as the country with the lowest risk perception in the panel. All this survey, all these results are due to the efforts of the country, as explained already via IPSI in the first section, to develop a strong national renewable energy strategy, also to implement a clear regulatory framework, and also to demonstrate its ability to materialize its ambition and to stay on track with these 2030 targets. So all these efforts and concrete achievements give real ability to the Moroccan authority and have a direct positive impact on the risk perception from the stakeholders. Another thing that can maybe noted from this survey is a decrease also of the risk perception for Egypt, Tunisia, and Jordan, and even at a slower pace, but in the future, should they further improve the renewable energy investment environment, they really follow the path of Morocco. So it's also countries that we can expect a lot in the future. Next slide, please. So the mitigation of risk perception is key in the region, especially because half of the renewable investment comes from foreign direct investments, and when it's only 6% in globally. So we can see it's not surprising to see Morocco at the first place of the country for renewable energy investment, and we can also see like the other country we've seen in the study before, Egypt and Jordan. Also United Arab Emirates and Israel was not in the panel of the study, but they're also countries, interesting countries for their political stability. Another thing interesting to see is the acceleration of investments since 2017, reaching over 7 billion a year of investment. And even if in 2020, due to the pandemic, these figures, we estimate these figures to have dropped by 80%. The recovery will be expected after the pandemic. But that's even with the recovery, that will not be enough to face the climate, to face the consequences of the climate change. And if we can switch to the next slide. Indeed, in this IRENA scenario, to stay under the 1.5–2 degrees impact of climate change, they estimate that the average investment to renewable energy should be around 17 billion a year. That's more than double the figures we see in the previous slide. And in terms of installed capacity on the actual path, we're gonna reach around 2,050 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity. But the needed capacity to stay on track to the Paris Agreement scenario is more over 50% more this capacity. So another point also, so we're way below what is needed to face to reach the Paris Agreement targets. And another thing that's another aspect that we have to be observed is the evolution of the fossil fuel sector, because for a global transition, obviously the increase on renewable energy investment have to come in parallel with a decrease on the fossil fuel. And what this study show is that the drop of investment in fuel sector is not on track to meet the Paris Agreement. So obviously, MENA is a key region due to its fossil fuel dependency, and this dependency may be an hurdle to the transition. If we switch to the next slide. So it will be, yeah, next slide, please. So the economy is really dependent on fossil fuel sector. You have the problem in MENA region is that the transition doesn't just concern the energy. It will also have to be economical and even political and social. It's a change of paradigm that will have to include renewable energy. On one hand, you have the importer countries that could reach energy independency and security thanks to the renewable energy. And on the other hand, and more strategically, is for exporter country, their dependence on oil and gas rent make them very vulnerable to the inevitable drop of fossil fuel extraction. If we switch to the next slide, you can see, like I said, the energy transition has to also be followed by a political and economical transition. And these figures show how the economy of the country is dependent of the fossil fuel sector. All the countries have a lot of subsidies for fossil fuel, and most of them have around 2/3 of their fiscal revenues that directly come for oil and gas sector. So in the future, the transition globally to a more resilient economy will drive this revenue from oil and gas, and may no longer will really challenge the fuel sector that may no longer be able to support the political economy that allow the political stability of this country. So switching on the next slide. So in other words, next slide, please. Okay, thank you. Yeah, in other words, globally, you have 1/3 of oil reserve of, no, previous slide. Yeah, anyway, 1/3 of the oil, 1/3 of the oil reserve, half of the gas, and 4/5 of the coal has to remain underground. We're not talking about reserves that can be reached, that technically reached. It's reserve that has to be willingly. Will have to be a political decision to not use them. So it will be a very unprecedented challenge for this country that will impact the whole economy and the whole social and the whole political and social model of this country that will have really to be changed in the next year. So in the next slide. So to summarize what we said in the last 20 minutes together with Ipsi, that we've seen what we saw as the main obstacle to the development of renewable energy, and this slide may want to show how they are all connected at the end, and what the at the root of all that is this country needs really more effort and political commitment to address the inevitable changes that the region will have to face in the future. And for that, renewable energy is one of the one can bring more stability. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mate. It was a great insight of what's there and the risks. And for the sake of time, we'll move to Mr. Riccardo Bicato, partner at Bonelli Erde Cairo. And Mr. Ricardo, I know they mostly took some of your time, but we are willing to, and we are looking forward to hear from you and get an exciting presentation. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, Ricardo.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Everybody, I will speak about the risk that still prevent the necessary investment in the MENA region. And what are these risks? Some of them has been already covered by my friends of Enel Green Power. The paper reports several risks which have limited the growth of the renewable energy investment in the MENA region. I will focus and try to elaborate on three risks. The first one, it has been already discussed, but is the legal risk related to the framework. I must say I'm never comfortable to speak about this risk unless I have some students in front of me, because it's difficult to say something which is not obvious or well known by the industry specialists like you. But I will do a try and try to, in particular, to elaborate on what has been said before by our friends of Enel Green Power. The risk of the legal risk is not just the risk of dealing with a lack or a pure regulatory framework. This was true, let's say, 10 years ago or some years ago, but today, as also correctly reported in the paper, most of the countries, or we say all of the countries, have adopted a legal framework on a different levels, of course. But the legal risk today is much more subtle. Is a risk of dealing with a legal framework that is not adequately implemented, either at all levels, either because there is not a second legislation, or because it may be construed as in conflict with other laws and regulations in the country. I will say that is a main risk, because it's a risk is of inconsistencies with the secondary legislation. Is mean because it's a risk that you find out only when you are getting there. So it's not something that sometimes you can foresee in advance. You just end up to be stuck with that problems after you have signed all documentation. And this often happen in those countries where there is a strong and well-developed legal system. Just it may be self-evident, but this happens because there is a huge, I mean, there are many laws, many regulations, which unfortunately often has not been considered when they have drafted the legal framework, and therefore you end up to have some discussion maybe with the administration authorities, which they will note, they will point out these inconsistencies, and you will be suffering delays in your project. Another point is, often people say to me, okay, but if we are going to have a standardized package, this should solve the issue. And I say, yes, for sure. Having a standardized set of project documentation, also during the tender procedure, will help and will speed up the process, will ensure transparency and certainty. But again, if then there has not been solved these inconsistencies, then you are just postponing the problem, and you, ironically, you can be also in a worse position when you have a standard form which doesn't speak very well with the underlying legislation, and then it's difficult to change that model. The other risk is the risk relating to bankability of the PPA and the availability of a sovereign guarantee. I'm more positive on the bankability of the PPA. I will say that in recently has been devising a bankable PPA has become an easier exercise, at least not on all the issues. Of course, currency is still a problem, but a number of issues are already saying the governments understand the needs to have a bankable PPA. But I still found that the real issue is the availability of a sovereign guarantee, which unfortunately is still considered the only tool for a financial institution and for export credit agencies supporting the financing to really finance a project renewables in the countries. And this is regardless whether the market has already the experience and some large scale project has been already developed. There is still in the financial institution a kind of or the position is, okay, I'm going to look to a project and to understand whether I want to finance that only if I know already there is a sovereign guarantee. So this is something to factor in by any government which really wants to really unlock the full potentiality of renewable and do a transition to renewables. The third risk, which I would like to share with you, and which has been again touched also indirectly by Matthew, is the risk that is more recent, because I noted the investors are more and more worried about which is whether the energy policy of the country, despite of the declaration, is really committed to renewables. As a lawyer, I was surprised when investors asked me, okay, but what do you think they are really committed to do so, or so you expect a technical question? But so is in the last year, especially even in those countries which they have already developed some renewables projects, there is a concern whether really they want to stick and they're committed to renewables. If you see a country that has promised to cut down the incentives to the oil and gas sector and they didn't, that creates a concern. If you see a country that is devoting a lot of effort and budgets to develop other sources which are not renewables, then the question is, okay, but there will be really a commitment there. Are they really serious, or are just trying to meet the targets required maybe by multilateral agency on renewable, just to comply with their requirements? So these are it is a risk that is there. It is not really something that as a lawyer we see, but I'm seeing this as something that is preventing the investment, further investment in the renewable sector. Just to conclude, I think this is the three things we just mentioned. So improving the regulatory system by coordinating adequately it with other bodies of laws, and supporting the transition to renewables with tools like a sovereign guarantee until the market is ready, and planning and sticking to the commitments of a true energy diversification. I appreciate it's not an easy task for any MENA countries. However, we cannot lose the momentum. This is the right time to do it, and I'm confident on this, because the MENA regions has the opportunity to really take an advantage from the lesson learned by other European countries, where the energy transition has already occurred or is about to occur. I try to wrap up as much as possible, considering the time. I'm done, and thank you so much for having invited me.
Thank you, Ricardo. although it was short, but it was to the point, and you illustrated all the risks clearly. Thank you. And yes, we have limited time, so I will not take a long time wrapping up what we said, because mostly the speakers made it clearly and to the point. I will just go back to Salvatore's words. Yes, we all need to have the decision to go. We need to be committed. We need to contribute and to work all together. And I think Morocco's case is a successful story, which we must all learn from. And there is, of course, a potential in the MENA region to go forward. Yes, the potential because of the resources, as illustrated, the regulatory frameworks are there and the legislations, but there is a need to really implement them in the right time. So maybe the plans and the investment plans and the role of the regulator has to be more strong to make those work and implementable. The risks are there. Yes, the legislation risks are there, as you said, Ricardo. I want to go for your word for the financial instruments that has to be there, because yes, sovereign guarantee is now not the greatest word for the government, and I don't really believe that it is the right solution for all the projects. So we need to find the right financial instrument to attract the investments and to have the markets and to talk regionally on the markets. If we're having renewable energy, we need to go for a better performance of our continent and our region to obtain the sustainable development goals, to make sure that our performance and benchmarking are increasing, not decreasing. And last but not least is the climate change issue. And I think the last few months showed us that this is not just a talk. This is an essential for our lives to go for renewable energy, not for only improving the life, but for keeping our planet safe. Now I must move the word to Mr. Jawad Al-Kharaz, Executive Director of the RECRE, to give us the closing remarks. Mr. Jawad, it's your floor now.
Thank you very much. I'm just trying to put my cam on. Buongiorno, good morning, sabah al-khair. Thanks, Mrs. Salma. First of all, I would like to thank Mr. Roberto Viguti and his team for having RECRE and me in this important event. I really enjoyed all the interventions. Secondly, I would like to congratulate you for this very interesting publication, connecting the dots, 10 years of renewables in MENA, what has not happened, which will definitely help the energy community in the region to understand better the challenges and the way forward. In fact, the MENA region has registered the biggest growth worldwide in the renewable energies markets in the last 20 years, while countries in the MENA region were making significant progress on adopting renewable energies. The current COVID-19 outbreak has led to plunging oil prices and driving vast social and economic disruption. So these recent developments, both in the oil market and the impact in terms of trade slowdown on the future of renewables, will need to be monitored closely as the region charts the way towards a greener energy profile. So the potential for wide-scale deployment of renewable energy technology in MENA region is considerable, as all we know. However, the existence of abundant resources is not sufficient for a major development. Thus, less than 10% of renewable energy resources are currently used, despite the fact that all countries have renewable energy strategies, policies, plans, and targets. Thus, in most countries of the MENA region, public resources are not enough for a remarkable development of renewables. This is particularly due to the current economic situation in the region. In addition, oil exporting countries, as mentioned, are affected by the evolution of prices, which beyond their volatility have been showing a downward trend for a few years now. In relation to the private sector, its limited participation in renewable energy project in the MENA region is noteworthy. One of the main reasons that can explain this trend is found in different risks associated with investments in renewable energy, which include political, financial, business, environment, regulatory, social, and environmental risk. Across the region, governments have set ambitious clean energy targets as shown in your publication in the interventions previously. The most ambitious country plan shown in Djibouti, for example, which intends to cover 100% of energy needs with the renewables by 2035. Regionally, as mentioned already, Morocco is taking the lead. It was shown by Mr. Ali Zarwali in his talk in terms of deployment of renewable energy and carbon dioxide abatements, with a pledge to produce 52% of the electricity through renewable energy by 2030, and to reduce emissions by 13% below the business as usual scenario. 7 countries in the region possess 90% of the current region-wide capacity, with Egypt and Morocco together accounting for nearly half, followed by Jordan, the UAE, Algeria, Tunisia, and Sudan. Jordan has the highest amount of renewable energy installed capacity per capita, while Yemen made large gains in the midst of crisis through emergency development interventions. So in the region, a range of barriers hinder the energy transition and impede the creation of vigorous markets. Those barriers differ depending on the technology used, the deployment priorities that have been agreed upon, be it utility-scale centralized PV, CSP, wind power, or small decentralized renewable energy applications. In addition, there is an urgent need to adopt policies and incentives in the region that mitigate market and commercial risk for investors, lenders associated with the deployment of renewable energy projects. Boosted by falling technology costs and the drive to reduce carbon dioxide emissions, most countries of the region are planning and procuring solar and wind projects. Most countries have or are in the process of creating a viable market for renewable energy investments. This is accomplished through enabling conditions, feed-in tariffs, net metering, auctions, etc. This already was showed in the publication, and attractive tariffs in different segments to encourage private investors to enter in the market. These enabling conditions are increasingly being supported by official long-term renewable energy targets set by different governments to ensure tangible impact of scaled-up renewable energy investment in the MENA. I fully agree with the recommendation provided by your publication in the last part of your publication, Connecting the Dots, which insists on addressing the structural challenges through reinforcing the public acceptance and consumer preference, boosting institutional development, and definitely development of technologies related to energy efficiency, digitalization, smart solutions, and only by addressing such structural challenges that we can achieve the energy transition. In addition, regulatory reform is the biggest challenge facing renewables. Merging renewable energy, primarily photovoltaic solar power, into power grids require policy adjustment and new regulations. These include ensuring grid flexibility, stability, integrating new technologies such as battery storage and electric vehicles, and establishing commercially attractive business models. Another challenge is to break the link between electricity and the water production, what we call water energy nexus, that is hard-coded into the regional utilities. Therefore, improving policies and the current regulatory framework is a must. On the other hand, cooperation among countries of the region is necessary to reinforce, to strengthen the power sector, in particular to help the countries that are not at the same level of development in terms of domestic reforms, attracting investments, pricing policies, and also in terms of innovative financing such as credit enhancement measures that can be catalytic in removing barriers and stimulating investments in renewables in the region. These funds must be channeled to build carbon neutral and resilient societies. The last recommendation on decoupling the traditional energy sources from the region's growth model is definitely right. And the countries of the region are aware of it at this stage. And all of them almost have ambitious targets in terms of energy mix diversification and increasing the share of renewables, and also progressing gradually on the subsidized reform and pricing policies. But they will still need to reduce dependency on hydrocarbon fiscal revenues to move to a sustainable fiscal path. As a technical arm of the Energy Department of the League of Arab States, RICRI, we have been contributing to the development and production of Arab region renewable energy efficiency guide, and we contributed to the Pan-Arab strategy for the development of renewable energy 2010 and 2030. And we will continue our support to Arab countries in the area of renewable energy policies, technologies, as well as boosting investment, PPPs, and involving the private sector and facilitating the know-how exchange and capacity building in the MENA and Africa as well. And we are glad to cooperate and join efforts with Race for Africa in those areas. Finally, despite difficulties faced by the region economies and energy sectors, the MENA world is taking bold steps to advance renewables and play a significant role in the global energy transition. There are a lot of opportunities for the private sector in the EU and the MENA region in the field of renewables, desalination, green hydrogen, and its derivatives, and there is an important expertise accumulated that could serve African countries. I will finish my talk with the last sentence, or rather recommendation of your publication, in particular in view of the COP26, where the clear message is that this is the time to deliver. National governments should state their objective in order to respect Paris Agreement commitments. Political decisions and investment to mitigate the economic dependency on fossil fuels must be taken now. Thank you a lot for your attention. Thank you again for your invitation. And I don't know, maybe some of you will be in Glasgow next week. I will be happy to meet face to face. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gawad. That was really impressive and concluding all what we wanted. For us, Egyptian, we'll come back to you for all what you've said at the end of your speech for the hydrogen and for the desalination. That's the future now. Before moving to Luca, I would like to ask our audience if you need to address your questions. For the sake of time, we cannot answer them on the webinar, but you can address that to the chat window, and it would be answered by the Access to Energy team. Now, the way forward, after answering those questions, Luca will give us the way forward. Luca Traiani, Access to Energy Program Manager at Rest for Africa Foundation. The floor is yours, Luca, and that's the end of our webinar, and I am sure that you will give us something sweetie and to eat. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Salma. Thank you for the introduction, and good morning, everyone. So actually, we could close with the last intervention, because it was so great and so inspiring about what we have ahead of us. But I think I remain here with the not easy task to present the recommendation, which you will find in the publication that will be available soon on the Rest for Africa website. So next slide, please. So 4 areas were identified as area of improvement. So the first one is to address structural challenges, because as you know, the energy transition will not just happen in the deep energy sector. Will happen all through our countries, all through the society, which means we have to involve and to create awareness among the public, because at the end of the day, they will act both as consumers and in some cases as self-generators. We need to strengthen, we need to have stronger institutions, because those will be the one to lead the transition. And we need to work on technologies, because we know that integrating renewable energies will require more digitalization, decentralization, flexibility of operation, and efficiency. Next slide, please. A second area which we have identified is that the area of policy and regulatory framework, in which we have seen there was a lot of work in the last 10 years, but still there is an area of improvement, particularly when we talk about the direct PPA, so the so-called commercial industrial market, the development, creation, implementation of master plan for renewable energy solution with realistic targets. Of course, the implementation of auction schemes, which have proven in the past years to be the most effective way to address capacity in our systems, and of course create or strengthen independent regulators in the countries. The next slide, please. The third area, as already mentioned, is about the cooperation among countries to create a stronger power sector and to enhance regional trade. And we see there are many opportunities here to optimize regional national resources and, of course, also reduce utilities inefficiencies. If we put those two together, we will find a space of savings which can be then transformed to unlock new resources for investment in renewable energy. But this, of course, and integration of renewable energy attracting investment will, of course, depend on working on pricing policy, because as we have seen, we need to work to ensure that tariffs match the cost of production. Otherwise, there will be less and less attraction of investment. Next slide, please. The last area which we have identified is the need for decoupling the region growth model from the traditional energy source. So meaning that diversification of the energy mix and reducing the dependency of countries from the oil and gas, which then will affect also the economy and reduce the dependency also on the fiscal side of it. Of course, these will be all just be possible if we will be able to move away from highly subsidized markets based on fossil fuel and keep on working for a better regional cooperation. Next slide, please. But I want to close saying that these very next years, these very decades will be crucial to set the path for the energy transition and a sustainable future. And we know that countries, government, institutions will try to balance the challenges and the opportunities, but at the same time we want to advocate also for the risk of non-action. So what will happen if we will not act now? And the thing that the study we just presented, we will find available on our website, and which try to analyze the last 10 years and what happened in the last decades, can be helpful for government, institutions, all the society to plan for a better and sustainable energy future. Thank you, and I believe back to Roberto.
Thank you so much, Luca. Thank you. I think it was worth a little bit of overtime to listen to you and, of course, to Dr. Eclasi's conclusion. Let me say, I'm really happy about this event. Please download the study from our website in a few days and disseminate around to collect comments, define priority, because we are in a situation now to plan for 2022-2023 action plan for MENA. I would like to be sure that you agree with our consideration. But again, this is an effort to allow my members, well, most of the investors, to come and co-share with you the know-how, but most important, co-invest in your country. I know already that from Morocco, Aliza Ruli is a good friend, and Salma as well. We already are making progress there, but I really want to thank Dr. Eclasi for the decree. I like to say we want to make a stronger collaboration program with you so that we can really learn from each other and be together with the MENA country and the Commission in Europe, being a good liaison because of the fact. Just to conclude, thanks all the speakers, of course. Just an additional, today in the stock exchange in the United States, Tesla has $1,000 billion more than Exxon. So one single company, crazy company of electrical cars and space flight, is more than the giant in oil, Exxon. That's something we should meditate, because the oil and gas industry must think ahead to avoid the tobacco and the Kodak effect. Things are moving. If Tesla is bigger in value than Exxon with all the reserve oil, something must be considered. I'm here again. Thank you so much, and please be in touch again with us for our plan, and hope to come to your country, Cairo, of course, and Rabat soon, but also everywhere. Thanks to all of you, and feel safe. Look, inshallah, we can come back soon to see you in person. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you so much.